I'm Andrea Mitchell. And 3 years ago, I thought I had everything figured out. At 34, I was the head of business development at Innovatech Industries, a mid-sized tech company that specialized in precision manufacturing solutions. I had a corner office, a six-figure salary, and what I believed was the respect of my colleagues. But as I sat in that sterile conference room on a Tuesday morning in March, watching the numbers on my laptop screen represent the biggest deal of my career, I had no idea that my entire world was about to crumble with a single text message. The meeting with Beacon International had been months in the making. $28 million. That's what this contract was worth. And I had orchestrated every detail, every negotiation, every compromise that had led us to this moment. David Chen, Beacon's procurement director, sat across from me with his team, their faces showing the kind of cautious optimism that comes with closing a deal of this magnitude. The conference room smelled of fresh coffee and possibility. "Andrea, I have to say, your team's proposal exceeded our expectations," David was saying, his fingers drumming lightly on the mahogany table. "The integration timeline, the cost structure, the quality assurance protocols, it's exactly what we need to expand our Southeast operations." I smiled, feeling that familiar rush of satisfaction that came with a job well done. "We believe in building partnerships, not just completing transactions. David, this contract represents the beginning of what I hope will be a long and profitable relationship between our companies." That's when my phone buzzed. A text message. I glanced down, expecting it to be something routine, maybe a colleague wishing me luck, or a reminder about another meeting. Instead, I saw a message that made my blood run cold. "Effective immediately. Your employment with Innovatech Industries is terminated. Please clean out your office by end of business today. Security will escort you out if necessary. Justin Garrett, Operations Director." I stared at the screen, reading the words over and over again, certain I was hallucinating. Justin Garrett, the CEO's 25-year-old son, who had never successfully closed a deal worth more than $100,000 in his entire career. The same Justin who had been openly resentful of my success, who made snide comments in meetings, who treated the family business like his personal playground. My hands were trembling slightly, but I forced myself to maintain composure. David was still talking about implementation schedules, completely unaware that the person he was negotiating with had just been fired via text message. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but years of corporate training kicked in. "David, I apologize, but there's been an unexpected development regarding the project lead on our side," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "I'm going to need to postpone the final signing until we can address some internal matters." The confusion on David's face was evident. "Andrea, is everything all right? We were ready to finalize everything today." "I understand, and I appreciate your patience. Someone from our team will be in touch within 48 hours to clarify the situation." I stood up, gathering my materials with practiced efficiency. "Thank you for your time today." As I walked out of that conference room, my mind was racing. 3 years of building relationships, securing deals, making Innovatech millions of dollars in revenue. And Justin Garrett had just thrown it all away with a text message sent while I was literally about to close the biggest deal in the company's history. But what Justin didn't know, what nobody at Innovatech knew, was that I had been keeping a secret for those entire 3 years. A secret that had been the foundation of the company's remarkable success, and a secret that was about to become Justin's worst nightmare. You see, my maiden name isn't just Mitchell by coincidence. My family owns Mitchell Precision Components, a specialized manufacturing company that produces high-grade technical components and precision parts for tech companies across the country. We've been in business for over 40 years, and we have relationships with suppliers and manufacturers that most companies could only dream of. When I first started at Innovatech, I discovered that they were struggling with supply chain issues. Their costs were too high, their quality was inconsistent, and they were losing bids to competitors who somehow managed to undercut them on price while maintaining superior quality. So I made a decision that would change everything. I quietly arranged for my family's company to become Innovatech's primary supplier, providing components and services at cost, or sometimes even at a loss. For 3 years, Mitchell Precision Components had been subsidizing Innovatech's success. Every major contract they won, every competitive advantage they enjoyed, every margin improvement they celebrated, it was all built on the foundation of my family's generosity and my strategic decision to help the company succeed from the shadows. The $25 million defense contract they'd won last year, that was only possible because we provided specialized titanium components at 30% below market rate. The $17 million healthcare deal, my family's precision manufacturing capabilities made their production timeline feasible. The $13 million aerospace contract, we had absorbed nearly $500,000 in development costs to help them meet the technical specifications. Kenneth Garrett, Justin's father and the CEO of Innovatech, had no idea that his company's remarkable turnaround had been quietly orchestrated by one of his own employees. He thought it was all due to improved management, better negotiations, and market timing. He had no clue that his son had just fired the person who had been single-handedly keeping the company competitive. As I drove back to the office, my phone was buzzing with calls and messages. Word travels fast in a company of 200 employees, and apparently Justin had already started spreading the news of my termination. I ignored them all. I had more important calls to make. The first call was to my brother Marcus, who ran operations at Mitchell Precision Components. Marcus, it's Andrea. I need you to immediately cease all preferential pricing arrangements with Innovatech Industries, effective immediately. Andrea, what's wrong? You sound upset. They just fired me via text message while I was closing a $28 million deal for them, I said, pulling into the Innovatech parking lot for what I assumed would be the last time. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. Marcus had never liked the arrangement from the beginning. He'd argued that subsidizing another company's success while keeping our involvement secret was bad business. But he'd gone along with it because I'd asked him to, and because he trusted my judgment. Well, he said finally, I guess it's time they learned what their real costs are. Marcus, I want you to send them a revised pricing structure by end of business today. Market rates across the board. No more family discounts. Consider it done. Andrea, are you sure you're okay? I will be, I said. And for the first time since reading that text message, I actually believed it. The second call was to my father, James Mitchell, the founder of Mitchell Precision Components. At 72 years old, he was semi-retired but still kept a close eye on major business decisions. Dad, it's Andrea. I need to fill you in on what just happened. After I explained the situation, there was a long pause. My father was a man of few words, but when he spoke, people listened. Andrea, in 40 years of business, I've learned that loyalty is a two-way street. If they don't value what you've brought to their table, then they don't deserve a seat at ours. So you support cutting ties? Honey, I support you. Whatever you decide to do next, you have the full backing of this family and this company. Those words meant more to me than any performance bonus or company recognition ever could. As I walked into the Innovatech building for the last time, I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. Justin Garrett thought he was firing a troublesome employee. He had no idea he was about to trigger the collapse of everything his father had worked to build. The next few hours were a blur of awkward conversations and barely concealed whispers. I cleaned out my office with as much dignity as I could muster, boxing up 3 years' worth of files, awards, and personal items. Kenneth Garrett was apparently in meetings all day. Or maybe he was just avoiding me. Several of my colleagues stopped by to express their shock and confusion, but I kept my responses brief and professional. I wish you the best, Andrea, said Tom Rodriguez, the head of engineering. This place won't be the same without you. Thank you, Tom. I'm sure everything will work out for the best, I replied, sealing another box with packing tape. Sarah Kim from marketing was more direct. This is insane. Andrea, everyone knows you're the best thing that's happened to this company in years. What is Kenneth thinking? I don't think Kenneth made this decision, I said carefully. But regardless, it's time for me to move on to new opportunities. As I loaded the last box into my car, I saw Justin Garrett watching me from his office window on the second floor. He had the satisfied smirk of someone who thought he'd just won a victory. I gave him a small wave and a smile, which seemed to confuse him. He probably expected tears, anger, or pleading. Instead, he got composure and confidence. That evening, I sat in my home office and began planning my next move. The revised pricing from Mitchell Precision Components would hit Innovatech in 48 hours. Within a week, their cost structure would increase by approximately 40% across all major components. Given their existing contracts and pricing commitments, this would turn most of their current projects from profitable ventures into significant losses. But I wasn't content to simply watch Innovatech struggle with increased costs. I had a bigger plan in mind. Over the next few days, I began laying the groundwork for Mitchell Strategic Solutions, my own consulting firm. The name was intentional. I wanted potential clients to make the connection to Mitchell Precision Components, establishing credibility and expertise from day one. My first call was to David Chen at Beacon International. David, it's Andrea Mitchell. I wanted to follow up on our meeting from earlier this week. Andrea, I was hoping to hear from you. We're still very interested in moving forward, but we haven't heard anything from Innovatech since you left the conference room. What's the status? David, I need to be completely transparent with you about something. As of Tuesday afternoon, I'm no longer with Innovatech Industries. The management structure there has undergone some changes, and I felt it was time for me to pursue independent opportunities. There was a pause. I see. Well, that's disappointing news. You were the primary reason we felt confident about this partnership. I appreciate that, David, which is why I wanted to reach out personally. I'm launching my own strategic solutions firm, and I'd like to discuss how we might be able to work together directly. You mean bypassing Innovatech entirely? What I mean is offering you the same quality of service and technical capabilities, but with greater transparency, competitive pricing, and direct accountability. No corporate bureaucracy, no middleman, just results. The conversation that followed was one of the most satisfying of my career. David was intrigued by the possibility of working directly with me, especially when I explained that my family's manufacturing company could provide the same components and services that Innovatech had been offering, but at a more competitive price point and with better quality control. By the end of the week, Beacon International had formally withdrawn their intent to contract with Innovatech and had begun preliminary discussions with Mitchell Strategic Solutions for a direct partnership worth $32 million, $4 million more than the original Innovatech proposal. But Beacon was just the beginning. Over the following 2 weeks, I systematically reached out to every major client that Innovatech had been courting, every potential partnership they'd been developing, and every relationship I'd built during my 3 years with the company. The response was overwhelming. Client after client expressed frustration with Innovatech's lack of responsiveness since my departure. Projects were stalling, communications were breaking down, and several companies had already begun looking for alternative solutions. Harrison Tech Solutions had been negotiating a $15 million contract with Innovatech for 6 months. When I called their procurement director, Janet Walsh, she was brutally honest about their experience. Andrea, I'm going to be frank with you. Since you left Innovatech, it's been a disaster. We've been trying to get answers about timeline modifications for 3 weeks, and nobody seems to know what's going on. Justin Garrett keeps scheduling meetings and then canceling them. We're seriously considering walking away from the whole deal. Janet, what if I told you that I could provide the same technical solution with better components, faster implementation, and a 20% cost reduction? I'd say you have my complete attention. Within a month of my termination, I had secured over $60 million in contracts that would have otherwise gone to Innovatech. My family's manufacturing capabilities, combined with my industry relationships and technical expertise, proved to be an unstoppable combination. Meanwhile, Innovatech was hemorrhaging money. The 40% increase in component costs had devastated their margins on existing contracts. New business development had ground to a halt without my relationships and expertise. Several major clients had canceled pending contracts, citing concerns about the company's ability to deliver. I heard through industry contacts that Kenneth Garrett was in full panic mode, holding emergency meetings with his leadership team, trying to understand how his company had gone from record profits to the brink of bankruptcy in less than 6 weeks. But the most satisfying news came from an unexpected source. Lisa Chen, a former colleague who still worked at Innovatech, called me on a Friday evening. "Andrea, you're not going to believe what happened today," she said, her voice excited and conspiratorial. "Try me." Justin called an all-hands meeting this afternoon. He stood up in front of the entire company and tried to blame the current crisis on market volatility and unforeseen supply chain disruptions. But here's the best part. Tom Rodriguez stood up and asked him directly why our component costs had increased by 40% overnight. And Justin had no answer. He literally just stood there stammering for 30 seconds before Kenneth jumped in and ended the meeting. I felt a grim satisfaction hearing this, but I wasn't done yet. My plan had been to simply outcompete Innovatech in the marketplace, but then something unexpected happened that changed everything. As Mitchell Strategic Solutions grew, I needed to establish more sophisticated financial and operational systems. I hired Dr. Melissa Carter, a forensic accountant with 20 years of experience in corporate investigations, to help me structure the business properly and ensure all our financial practices were bulletproof. During our initial consultation, Melissa asked me a series of routine questions about my previous employment, including details about Innovatech's financial practices and procurement procedures. As I described the company's operations, I noticed her taking increasingly detailed notes. "Andrea, some of what you're describing raises red flags for me," she said during our second meeting. "The vendor approval processes, the invoice routing, the budget authorization workflows. There are several gaps that could potentially be exploited." "What kind of gaps?" "The kind that make embezzlement and fraud relatively easy to hide, especially if someone in a position of financial authority wanted to manipulate the system." I had never considered the possibility of financial misconduct at Innovatech. The company had always seemed well-managed and profitable, at least from my perspective in business development. But Melissa's concerns got me thinking about some inconsistencies I'd noticed over the years, but had never really questioned. "Melissa, hypothetically speaking, if someone wanted to investigate potential financial irregularities at my former company, how would they go about it?" She smiled. "Hypothetically speaking, they would start by analyzing patterns in vendor payments, looking for shell companies, duplicate invoices, and authorization anomalies. They would examine expense reports, travel reimbursements, and consulting fees. And they would pay particular attention to any transactions that bypassed normal approval processes. And hypothetically, how long would such an investigation take? If someone provided the right starting points and had access to the relevant financial records, probably 6 to 8 weeks for a preliminary analysis. I made a decision that would prove to be more consequential than I could have imagined. Using my industry connections and leveraging some mutual business relationships, I arranged for Melissa to conduct a limited forensic review of Innovatech's publicly available financial information and vendor relationships. What she discovered was staggering. 6 weeks later, Melissa called me to her office with a thick folder of documentation and a grave expression on her face. "Andrea, we have a problem. A big problem." She laid out a complex web of financial manipulation that had been going on for nearly 5 years. Fake vendors, inflated invoices, diverted payments, and elaborate expense reimbursement schemes had siphoned nearly $3 million from Innovatech's accounts. "Who?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "Julia Emerson, the Chief Financial Officer. She's been systematic, sophisticated, and incredibly careful. But she made one crucial mistake. She got greedy during the company's recent period of high profitability, and the amounts became large enough to create detectable patterns. Julia Emerson, I had worked with her dozens of times over the years, collaborating on budget projections, contract negotiations, and financial planning. She was a quiet, methodical woman in her 50s who had been with Innovatech for over a decade. The idea that she had been stealing millions of dollars was almost impossible to believe. Melissa, how confident are you in this analysis? Confident enough to stake my professional reputation on it. Andrea, this woman has been robbing the company blind. And she's been using the recent increase in business volume to cover her tracks. I sat in stunned silence, processing the implications. Innovatech's financial crisis wasn't just due to increased component costs and lost business. The company had been hemorrhaging money for years through systematic theft, and Julia had been covering it up by manipulating the books. There's something else, Melissa continued. Based on the timing of some of these transactions, I believe someone at the company was starting to get suspicious. Several of the more recent fraudulent payments were structured differently, almost as if she was trying to accelerate her timeline. What do you mean? I mean, someone might have been closing in on her, and she was trying to extract as much money as possible before getting caught. A terrible thought occurred to me. Melissa, is it possible that someone suspected me of being involved in this? She looked at me seriously. Given your role in business development and your involvement in vendor relationships, if someone was conducting an internal investigation and didn't have access to the full picture, you could potentially have been considered a person of interest. The pieces suddenly clicked into place. Justin's hostility toward me, his decision to fire me so abruptly, his apparent satisfaction at my termination. What if he hadn't been acting out of petty jealousy? What if he had genuinely believed I was involved in financial misconduct? I spent the weekend wrestling with this possibility. As much as I despised Justin for how he had treated me, the idea that he might have fired me because he thought he was protecting the company put a different spin on everything. On Monday morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. I called Innovatech and asked to speak with Kenneth Garrett. Kenneth, this is Andrea Mitchell. I know this is unexpected, but I need to meet with you and Justin as soon as possible. There's something critically important we need to discuss. Andrea, I'm not sure that's appropriate given the circumstances. Kenneth, your company is being robbed, and has been for years. If you care about Innovatech's survival, you'll meet with me today. 2 hours later, I was sitting in the same conference room where I had been fired 6 weeks earlier. Kenneth looked haggard and stressed, the toll of the company's recent struggles evident in his appearance. Justin was there too, though he seemed surprised and uncomfortable with my presence. Andrea, I appreciate you reaching out, Kenneth began, but I'm not sure what you hope to accomplish with this meeting. I placed Melissa's folder on the table. Kenneth, what I'm about to show you is going to be difficult to accept, but your company has been the victim of systematic embezzlement for nearly 5 years. For the next hour, I walked them through Melissa's findings. The fake vendors, the inflated invoices, the diverted payments, the entire elaborate scheme that Julia Emerson had constructed to steal nearly $3 million from the company. Kenneth's face went through a range of emotions: disbelief, anger, devastation, and finally, grim determination. Justin, meanwhile, had gone completely silent, staring at the documents with a look of growing horror. Justin, I said finally, I need to ask you something directly. Did you fire me because you suspected I was involved in financial misconduct? He looked up at me, and for the first time since I'd known him, his arrogance was completely gone. Andrea, Yes. I had been noticing discrepancies in vendor payments and contract margins. I started doing my own investigation, and your name kept coming up in connection with vendor relationships and budget approvals. I thought. He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. You thought I was stealing from the company. Yes. And I was so angry, so convinced that I was right, that I wanted to humiliate you. I wanted everyone to see that the golden girl of business development was actually a fraud. His voice was barely above a whisper. I was completely wrong. Kenneth was staring at his son with a mixture of disappointment and understanding. Justin, why didn't you come to me with your suspicions? Because I wanted to prove myself to you. I wanted to be the one who exposed the problem and saved the company. I thought it would finally show you that I could handle real responsibility. The room fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning system. I looked at both men, seeing the weight of the situation settling on their shoulders. There's something else you both need to know, I said. The reason Innovatech was so successful over the past 3 years, the reason you were able to win all those major contracts and maintain competitive margins, it wasn't just good business practices. I explained about Mitchell Precision Components, about the years of subsidized pricing and behind-the-scenes support that had kept Innovatech competitive. I told them about the preferential treatment, the absorbed costs, and the family connections that had made their success possible. Kenneth's face went pale. Andrea, are you telling me that your family company has been essentially funding our competitive advantage? Yes. And when Justin fired me, I ended that arrangement immediately. Your 40% cost increase isn't due to market conditions. It's because you're now paying fair market rates for components and services. Justin looked like he was going to be sick. Andrea, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I've destroyed everything, haven't I? I studied his face, seeing genuine remorse for the first time. The arrogant, entitled young man I had known was gone, replaced by someone who was finally understanding the full weight of his actions. Justin, what you did was wrong. The way you handled your suspicions was unprofessional and cruel. But your motivation, protecting the company you love, that wasn't wrong. I turned to Kenneth. The question now is what happens next. Julia Emerson needs to be confronted with this evidence, and you need to decide whether to pursue criminal charges or try to recover the money through civil action. Kenneth nodded grimly. What would you recommend? Bring her in immediately, present the evidence, and see if she's willing to make restitution voluntarily. If she cooperates, you might be able to recover a significant portion of the stolen funds without the expense and publicity of a criminal trial. The confrontation with Julia Emerson happened 2 days later. Melissa and I were present as consultants. While Kenneth and the company's attorney handled the actual meeting, Julia's reaction was everything we had expected and more. When presented with the evidence, she initially tried to deny everything, then attempted to minimize the scope of the theft, and finally broke down completely and confessed to the entire scheme. She had been stealing from the company for nearly 5 years, starting small with inflated expense reports and gradually escalating to elaborate vendor fraud. The money had gone to support a gambling addiction that had spiraled out of control, combined with expensive medical treatments for her husband's cancer that their insurance hadn't fully covered. I never meant for it to go this far, she said through tears. It started with just a few $1,000s to cover medical bills, and then I couldn't stop. When the company started doing so well, I thought I could take a little more and no one would notice. Kenneth's voice was cold. Julia, you've stolen nearly $3 million from this company. You've put every job here at risk. I know, and I'm sorry. I've been trying to figure out how to pay it back. But the amounts got so large, and I was in so deep. Melissa leaned forward. Julia, are you prepared to make full restitution? I'll do whatever I can. I've already liquidated most of my retirement accounts and sold my house. I can probably recover about $2 million immediately. And I'm willing to sign over all my remaining assets and future earnings until the debt is paid. The negotiation that followed was complex and emotionally draining, but ultimately successful. Julia agreed to immediate restitution of $2.2 million, plus a structured payment plan for the remainder. In exchange, Innovatech agreed not to pursue criminal charges. As we were leaving the building after the settlement was finalized, Justin caught up with me in the parking lot. Andrea, wait, I need to say something. I turned to face him, curious about what he wanted to discuss. I need to apologize, properly this time, not just for being wrong about you, but for how I handled everything. The way I fired you, the way I treated you, the way I let my jealousy and insecurity drive my decisions. It was all completely unacceptable. Justin, I appreciate the apology. But what matters now is what you do going forward. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. I'm leaving Innovatech. This surprised me. Why? Because I've proven that I'm not ready for the responsibility my father has been trying to give me. I need to go out and earn my own success, build my own reputation, learn how to be a leader instead of just acting like one. What will you do? I'm starting a consulting practice focused on financial fraud prevention for small and medium-sized businesses. After everything that's happened, I realize there's a real need for this kind of service, and I want to help other companies avoid what we went through. I nodded approvingly. That sounds like a worthy pursuit. Andrea, I have one more request. Would you consider coming back to Innovatech? My father is prepared to offer you a significant promotion and equity stake in the company. I had been expecting this question and had already decided on my answer. Justin, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not coming back. His face fell. Because you can't forgive me? No. Because I've discovered something important over the past few months. I'm better as an independent operator than I ever was as an employee. Mitchell Strategic Solutions is growing faster than I ever imagined, and I'm building something that's truly mine. I understand. But Andrea, would you consider a partnership arrangement, not as an employee, but as a strategic partner? Innovatech needs to rebuild its client relationships and reputation. And you've proven that you're the best in the business at that. I considered this proposal carefully. There was a certain poetic justice to the idea of helping rebuild the company that had fired me, but doing it on my own terms rather than as their employee. Let me think about it, I said finally. But any partnership would have to be completely transparent, with full disclosure about my family company's involvement and fair market pricing for all components and services. Of course, we want to build this relationship on honesty this time. Over the following weeks, Kenneth, Justin, and I worked out the details of a strategic partnership between Mitchell Strategic Solutions and Innovatech. The arrangement would allow Innovatech to benefit from my client relationships and industry expertise while giving me the resources and manufacturing capabilities I needed to grow my own business. The partnership was announced at an industry conference 6 months later, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. Clients appreciated the transparency and improved service quality, while competitors struggled to understand how Innovatech had managed such a remarkable turnaround. As I stood on the stage at that conference, looking out at an audience of industry leaders and potential clients, I reflected on everything that had happened. 6 months earlier, I had been fired via text message by someone who thought I was embezzling from his company. Today, I was announcing a strategic partnership that would benefit both organizations while maintaining my independence and integrity. The question and answer session after my presentation was lively and engaging. One audience member asked about the challenges of transitioning from employee to entrepreneur. The biggest challenge, I said, was learning to trust my own judgment completely. When you're an employee, you can always defer difficult decisions to someone else or blame external factors when things go wrong. As an entrepreneur, every success and every failure is ultimately your responsibility. Another question came from a young woman in the front row. Ms. Mitchell, what advice would you give to someone who feels undervalued or mistreated in their current position? I thought carefully before answering. First, make sure you truly understand the situation. Sometimes what feels like mistreatment is actually miscommunication or misunderstanding. But if you've done your due diligence and you're genuinely being treated unfairly, don't waste time trying to change other people's minds. Focus that energy on building your own value and creating your own opportunities. Diden. And if someone has wronged you professionally, do you believe in revenge? This question hit close to home, and I could see Justin in the audience, listening intently to my answer. I don't believe in revenge, I said, but I absolutely believe in justice. Sometimes the best response to being wronged is simply to succeed so completely that the injustice becomes irrelevant. Success is the ultimate vindication. After the conference, Justin approached me at the reception. That was a great presentation, Andrea, and I appreciated your answer about revenge versus justice. It took me a while to understand the difference, I admitted. For the first few weeks after you fired me, I was motivated primarily by anger and a desire to prove you wrong. But eventually, I realized that building something positive was more satisfying than tearing something down. I'm glad you feel that way. And Andrea, I want you to know that I've learned more about leadership and responsibility in the past 6 months than I did in the previous 5 years. How so? Because consequences have weight when they're real. When I was just the CEO's son playing at business, my mistakes didn't really matter. But when my actions nearly destroyed the company and hurt people I cared about, I finally understood what was at stake. I looked at him appraisingly. The transformation was remarkable. The entitled, arrogant young man I had known was gone, replaced by someone who seemed genuinely committed to earning respect rather than demanding it. Justin, can I ask you something? Of course. When you first started suspecting financial misconduct, why didn't you consider that there might be legitimate explanations for what you were seeing? He was quiet for a moment. Honestly? Because I wanted you to be guilty. You were everything I thought I should be. Successful, respected, trusted by my father. And I resented that. When I saw patterns that could indicate wrongdoing, I jumped to the conclusion that fit my prejudices rather than doing a thorough investigation. That's a remarkably honest self-assessment. I've had a lot of time to think about my motivations and biases. Starting my own business has been humbling in ways I never expected. How is the fraud prevention consulting going? Better than I hoped. It turns out there are a lot of small businesses that have experienced financial irregularities but don't know how to investigate or address them properly. I'm helping them implement better controls and detection systems. That sounds rewarding. It is. And Andrea, I want you to know that I tell every client the story of what happened at Innovatech, including my role in nearly destroying the company through hasty judgment and poor decision-making. It's become a case study in how not to handle internal investigations. 6 months later, I received an unexpected call from David Chen at Beacon International. Andrea, I have some interesting news. We've been so pleased with the work Mitchell Strategic Solutions has done for us that we're recommending you to our parent company for a much larger project. How much larger? $75 million over 3 years. They're looking for a strategic partner to help them expand into the European market, and your combination of technical expertise and manufacturing relationships makes you the ideal candidate. I was stunned. $75 million would make Mitchell Strategic Solutions one of the major players in the industry virtually overnight. David, I'm honored by the recommendation. When would they want to begin discussions? Next month. Andrea, I have to ask. Would you have the capacity to handle a project of this magnitude? It was a fair question. Despite our growth, Mitchell Strategic Solutions was still a relatively small operation compared to the established consulting firms that typically handled contracts of this size. David, let me be completely transparent with you. A project of this scope would require me to significantly expand my team and capabilities. But yes, I'm confident that we can deliver the results you're looking for. That's what I was hoping to hear. I'll send you the preliminary project details this afternoon. As I hung up the phone, I realized that I was facing the same kind of pivotal moment that had led me to start the company in the first place. I could play it safe, decline the project, and continue growing at a manageable pace. Or I could take the risk, expand aggressively, and potentially transform Mitchell Strategic Solutions into a major industry player. The decision, ultimately, was easy. I had learned that the biggest risks often led to the biggest rewards, and I was no longer afraid of betting on myself. The expansion of Mitchell Strategic Solutions over the following year was intense and challenging, but ultimately successful. We hired 12 new employees, opened offices in 2 additional cities, and developed strategic partnerships with manufacturing and consulting firms across the country. The European expansion project for Beacon's parent company exceeded all expectations, leading to additional contracts worth over $100 million. By the end of the year, Mitchell Strategic Solutions had become one of the fastest-growing consulting firms in the industry. Throughout this period, my partnership with Innovatech continued to evolve and strengthen. Kenneth Garrett had implemented sweeping changes to the company's financial controls and governance structure, while Justin's fraud prevention consulting had helped several of Innovatech's clients improve their own operational security. The relationship between Justin and me had transformed completely. What had started as mutual hostility had evolved into professional respect and, eventually, genuine friendship. He had become one of my most trusted advisors, and I often consulted with him on complex business decisions. One evening, as we were reviewing plans for a joint project between our companies, Justin brought up something that had been on his mind. "Andrea, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure." "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't fired you?" It was a question I had considered many times over the past 2 years. Honestly, I think I would still be working at Innovatech, probably in a senior management role, making good money and feeling satisfied with my career. But you wouldn't have Mitchell Strategic Solutions. No, probably not. I was comfortable at Innovatech. Maybe too comfortable. It took being forced out to make me realize that I wanted to build something of my own. So in a weird way, firing you is the best thing that could have happened to your career? I laughed. "Justin, I wouldn't go that far. The way you handled it was still completely wrong, and it caused a lot of unnecessary pain and stress. But yes, in retrospect, being forced to leave Innovatech opened doors that I never would have walked through otherwise." "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," he said. "How sometimes our worst mistakes can lead to unexpected opportunities, not just for ourselves but for the people we hurt." "What do you mean?" "Well, if I hadn't acted so rashly, you might never have started your own company. Innovatech might never have discovered Julia's embezzlement. I might never have learned the hard lessons I needed to learn about leadership and responsibility. It's like our mistakes created a chain reaction that ultimately made everyone stronger." I considered this perspective. Maybe that's true, but I don't think we should romanticize it too much. The pain and stress you caused were real, even if good things eventually came from it. You're absolutely right. I'm not trying to justify what I did or minimize the harm it caused. I'm just amazed, I guess, at how complicated life can be. How something that seems purely destructive at the time can have unexpected positive consequences. Justin, can I tell you something I've learned over the past 2 years? Of course. Success isn't about avoiding mistakes or eliminating failure. It's about how you respond when things go wrong. You made a terrible mistake when you fired me, but the way you've handled the aftermath, the genuine remorse, the personal growth, the commitment to making amends, that's what defines your character. He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you for saying that. It means a lot, especially coming from you. And Justin, I want you to know that I don't think of you as the person who fired me anymore. I think of you as the person who learned from his mistakes and became someone better." The conversation was interrupted by my phone ringing. It was Marcus, calling from the Mitchell Precision Components facility. "Andrea, we have a situation. There's been an industrial accident at one of our clients' facilities, not serious injuries, thank God, but significant equipment damage. They're asking if we can expedite replacement components to get them back online." "Which client?" "Meridian Manufacturing. They're not one of our biggest accounts, but they're good people, and this could put them out of business if we can't help them quickly." "What do they need?" "Custom titanium assemblies, precision machined to very tight tolerances. Normally, it would take us 6 weeks, but they need them in 10 days to avoid missing critical delivery deadlines." I thought quickly. "Marcus, what would it take to make that timeline work?" "We'd have to pull people off other projects, work around the clock, and probably take a loss on the job. But it's doable if you think it's worth it." "Do it. And Marcus, don't charge them for the expedite fees or overtime costs. Consider it a community service." "Are you sure? That's probably $40,000 in absorbed costs." "I'm sure. Sometimes doing the right thing is more important than maximizing profit." After I hung up, Justin was looking at me with curiosity. That was interesting to listen to. You just cost your company $40,000 to help a client you described as not one of your biggest accounts. Sometimes the most important business decisions aren't really business decisions at all, I said. They're character decisions. Meaning that how you treat people when they're vulnerable says more about who you are than how you negotiate when you have leverage. Meridian is a small company run by good people who treat their employees well and care about their community. If I can help them survive a crisis, that's worth more to me than the profit margin on one job. Even though you'll probably never see a return on that investment? Justin, you're thinking about this wrong. The return isn't financial, it's reputational. Word will get around the industry that Mitchell Strategic Solutions went above and beyond to help a client in crisis. That reputation for integrity and reliability is worth far more than $40,000. 3 weeks later, I received a call that proved my point. The CEO of Meridian Manufacturing was on the line, along with the procurement director of North Star Industries, one of the largest manufacturing companies in the region. Andrea, this is Bob Williams from Meridian. I wanted to thank you again for what your company did to help us through our crisis, and I wanted you to meet Janet Rodriguez from North Star Industries. Ms. Mitchell, Janet said. Bob has been telling me about how Mitchell Strategic Solutions helped Meridian recover from their equipment failure. I have to say, that level of commitment to client service is exactly what we're looking for in a strategic partner. The conversation that followed led to a $50 million contract with North Star Industries, representing the largest single project in Mitchell Strategic Solutions history. The $40,000 I'd absorbed to help Meridian had generated a return of over 1,000%. But more than the financial return, the experience reinforced something I had learned throughout my journey: that business success wasn't just about being smart or strategic or even hardworking. It was about being the kind of person that others wanted to work with, trust, and recommend to their colleagues. As Mitchell Strategic Solutions continued to grow, I found myself thinking more and more about the broader lessons from my experience. The story of my firing from Innovatech and the subsequent success of my company had become something of a legend in our industry. But I was increasingly uncomfortable with how it was being told. The narrative that had emerged portrayed me as a wronged employee who had gotten revenge on her former company through superior business acumen. While there was some truth to this version, it missed the more important lessons about forgiveness, growth, and the power of turning adversity into opportunity. I decided to address this directly in a speech I was scheduled to give at the National Business Leadership Conference. The theme of the conference was resilience and reinvention, and I had been asked to speak about my experience as an entrepreneur. Standing at the podium in front of 800 business leaders, I began with the story they expected to hear: the text message firing, the secret family support, the competitive response. But then I took the narrative in a different direction. The version of this story that most people tell focuses on revenge and vindication, I said. And I understand why that narrative is appealing. We like stories where the wronged party gets justice and the villain gets their comeuppance. But that's not really what happened here. I looked out at the audience, seeing faces that ranged from curious to skeptical. What really happened is that a young man made a serious mistake based on incomplete information and flawed judgment. That mistake had significant consequences for multiple people and organizations. But instead of doubling down on his error or trying to cover it up, he acknowledged his mistake, took responsibility for the consequences, and worked to make amends. I could see Justin in the audience, looking surprised and slightly uncomfortable with the attention. The real lesson isn't about revenge or even about resilience. It's about the power of honest self-reflection and genuine change. It's about the importance of looking beyond our initial emotional reactions to understand the full complexity of any situation. During the question and answer session, a woman in the back row raised her hand. Ms. Mitchell, your story is inspiring, but it seems like you're being very generous to someone who treated you quite badly. Don't you think that sends the wrong message about holding people accountable for their actions? It was a fair question, and one I had wrestled with myself. I think there's an important distinction between accountability and vengeance, I replied. Justin was absolutely held accountable for his actions. He faced the consequences of nearly destroying his family's company. He lost the respect of his colleagues. And he had to confront some hard truths about his own character and motivations. But he didn't face any formal punishment. He wasn't fired or demoted or sued. That's true. But sometimes the most powerful accountability comes from internal recognition of wrongdoing rather than external punishment. Justin's growth and change over the past few years suggests that he learned the lessons he needed to learn. How can you be sure that his remorse is genuine rather than just expedient? I glanced at Justin, then back at the questioner. Because I've watched him make difficult decisions that cost him personally in order to do the right thing. Because I've seen him sacrifice opportunities for advancement in order to focus on building genuine expertise. Because I've witnessed him take responsibility for mistakes even when he could have blamed others. After the conference, several people approached me to continue the conversation. Many of them shared their own stories of workplace conflicts, business partnerships gone wrong, and the challenges of balancing justice with forgiveness. One conversation in particular stuck with me. A middle-aged man named Robert Chen introduced himself as the CEO of a technology company in California. Ms. Mitchell, I wanted to thank you for your presentation today. Your perspective on accountability versus vengeance really resonated with me. I'm glad to hear that. Are you dealing with a similar situation? In a way, yes. 6 months ago, I discovered that my business partner had been making significant decisions without consulting me. Decisions that put our company at serious financial risk. My instinct was to buy him out immediately and cut all ties. But you didn't? No, I didn't. Instead, I confronted him directly and tried to understand why he had acted the way he did. It turned out that he was dealing with some serious personal issues that were affecting his judgment, and he was too proud to ask for help. How did you handle it? We restructured our partnership agreement to include better communication protocols and decision-making frameworks. We also arranged for him to take a temporary leave to address his personal issues. It wasn't easy. And there were times when I questioned whether I was being too lenient. And how did it work out? Robert smiled. Better than I could have hoped. He came back from his leave with a renewed focus and commitment to the company. We've actually grown faster in the past 6 months than we had in the previous 2 years. More importantly, our working relationship is stronger than it's ever been. What do you think made the difference? Honestly, I think it was the fact that I approached the situation with curiosity rather than judgment. Instead of assuming the worst about his motivations, I tried to understand what was really happening. That made all the difference. As I drove home from the conference that evening, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this point. 4 years earlier, I had been a successful but ultimately ordinary business development manager. Today, I was the CEO of a rapidly growing consulting firm, a recognized speaker on business leadership, and someone who had learned to find opportunity in adversity. But more than the professional success, I was proud of the personal growth that had come from navigating this experience. I had learned to look beyond surface conflicts to understand underlying motivations. I had developed the confidence to take calculated risks and bet on myself. Most importantly, I had discovered that success wasn't just about achieving your goals, but about who you became in the process of pursuing them. The next morning, I received a call from Kenneth Garrett. Andrea, I wanted to thank you for what you said about Justin at the conference yesterday. I know it couldn't have been easy to speak so generously about someone who had treated you badly. Kenneth, I meant every word. Justin has genuinely changed. And I think it's important to acknowledge that growth when we see it. Well, I appreciate it more than you know. But I'm actually calling about something else. I've been thinking about succession planning for Innovatech, and I wanted to discuss something with you. What kind of succession planning? I'm 68 years old. Andrea, I've been running this company for 30 years, and I think it's time to start thinking about the next generation of leadership. And you're considering Justin for the CEO role. Actually, I'm considering both of you. I'd like to propose a co-leadership structure, with you and Justin sharing executive responsibility for the company's strategic direction. This was completely unexpected. Kenneth, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure that makes sense. I have my own company now, and it's doing very well. I understand that, and I'm not asking you to give up Mitchell Strategic Solutions. I'm proposing a merger that would combine your expertise and client relationships with Innovatech's manufacturing capabilities and operational infrastructure. I was intrigued despite myself. What would that look like in practice? Mitchell Strategic Solutions would become the consulting and business development arm of a larger organization, while Innovatech would handle manufacturing and operations. You and Justin would share responsibility for overall strategy and direction, but you'd each focus on your areas of expertise. And what would be the benefit for me? Scale, resources, and the ability to take on projects that would be impossible for either company to handle independently. Andrea, you've built something remarkable with Mitchell Strategic Solutions. But imagine what you could accomplish with the full backing of a larger organization. It was an intriguing proposition, but also a complex one with significant implications for both companies. Kenneth, I need time to think about this. It's not just a business decision, it would fundamentally change the nature of what I've built. Of course, take all the time you need. But Andrea, I want you to know that this isn't just about business for me. Over the past few years, I've watched you and Justin both grow and change in remarkable ways. The idea of working together to build something even bigger and better than what either of you could accomplish alone, that's exciting to me. After we hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out the window and considering Kenneth's proposal. The business logic was sound. A merger would give both companies access to capabilities and resources that would be difficult to develop independently. But there were also emotional and psychological factors to consider. I had started Mitchell Strategic Solutions as a way to prove my independence and capability. Merging with Innovatech might feel like giving up that independence, even if the practical benefits were significant. On the other hand, the merger would allow me to take on projects and pursue opportunities that were currently beyond my reach. It would also represent a kind of full-circle completion of the journey that had started with my firing 4 years earlier. I decided to discuss the proposal with my family, my key employees, and my most trusted advisors before making a decision. The conversation with my father was particularly illuminating. Dad, what do you think about Kenneth's proposal? James Mitchell was quiet for a moment, considering the implications. Andrea, when you first started Mitchell Strategic Solutions, what was your primary motivation? Honestly, at first, it was anger and a desire to prove that Innovatech had made a mistake by firing me. And what's your motivation now? Now? I want to build something meaningful that makes a positive impact on the industry and provides value to our clients. And would this merger help you accomplish that goal? I think it would, yes. The combined capabilities would allow us to take on more complex projects and serve clients in ways that neither company could manage independently. Then it sounds like you have your answer. But Dad, I'm worried that I'd be giving up the independence and autonomy that I've worked so hard to build. Andrea, true independence isn't about working alone. It's about having the freedom to make choices based on your values and priorities rather than external constraints. If this merger aligns with your values and serves your long-term goals, then it represents independence, not a surrender of it. His perspective helped clarify my thinking considerably. The merger wasn't about giving up what I had built, it was about taking it to the next level. My conversations with key employees were similarly enlightening. Rather than seeing the merger as a threat to their jobs or the company culture, most of them were excited about the opportunities it would create. Andrea, we've been turning down projects because we don't have the manufacturing capabilities to deliver what clients are asking for, said Tom Rodriguez, who had left Innovatech to join Mitchell Strategic Solutions the previous year. This merger would allow us to say yes to opportunities that we currently have to pass up. Sarah Kim, who had also made the transition from Innovatech, was even more enthusiastic. The combination of your strategic vision with Innovatech's operational capabilities could create something really special. We could become the kind of full-service partner that clients dream about but rarely find. After 3 weeks of deliberation, I called Kenneth to schedule another meeting. Kenneth, I've given your proposal a lot of thought, and I'm interested in moving forward, but I have some conditions that would need to be part of any agreement. I'm listening. First, the merger needs to be structured as a true partnership of equals, not an acquisition. Mitchell Strategic Solutions brings significant value to this relationship, and that needs to be reflected in the ownership structure and decision-making authority. That's fair. What else? Second, we need to maintain the culture and values that have made Mitchell Strategic Solutions successful. I don't want to see our client-first philosophy get lost in a larger bureaucratic structure. Agreed. What's your third condition? We need a clear succession plan that ensures the long-term stability and growth of the combined organization. I want to make sure that we're building something that will outlast any individual leader." Kenneth smiled. "Andrea, those conditions tell me that you're thinking about this the right way. You're not just considering the immediate benefits, you're thinking about the long-term implications for all stakeholders." The merger negotiations took another 6 months to complete, but the final agreement exceeded my expectations in every important respect. The new organization, Mitchell Innovatech Strategic Solutions, would combine the consulting expertise of my company with the manufacturing capabilities of Innovatech under a shared leadership structure. Justin and I would serve as co-CEOs, with clearly defined areas of responsibility but shared authority over strategic decisions. Kenneth would remain as chairman of the board for 2 years before transitioning to an advisory role. The announcement of the merger generated significant attention in the industry press, with most coverage focusing on the unusual story of 2 executives who had gone from conflict to collaboration. But for me, the most meaningful moment came during the employee meeting where we announced the merger to both organizations simultaneously. 4 years ago, I said, looking out at the combined team of nearly 100 people. I was fired from Innovatech via text message. Today, I'm standing here as co-CEO of an organization that represents the best of both companies we've built. I paused, seeing faces that reflected curiosity, excitement, and in some cases, amazement at the journey that had brought us to this point. This merger isn't just about combining 2 successful companies. It's about proving that conflict doesn't have to be permanent, that people can grow and change, and that sometimes our greatest failures can become the foundation for our greatest successes. Justin stepped forward to address the group. "I want to acknowledge something publicly that I've never said before. 4 years ago, I made the worst decision of my professional career when I fired Andrea. I was wrong about the facts, wrong about her character, and wrong about how to handle my concerns." He looked directly at me before continuing. "But Andrea taught me something important, that how you respond to failure matters more than the failure itself. This merger represents not just a business opportunity, but a chance to build something meaningful together." The applause that followed was long and enthusiastic. But what struck me most was the genuine emotion I saw on faces throughout the room. These weren't just employees witnessing a corporate announcement. They were people who understood that they were part of something larger than business as usual. Over the following months, the integration of the 2 companies proceeded more smoothly than anyone had anticipated. The cultural fit was excellent, the operational synergies were real, and the client response was overwhelmingly positive. Within the first year, Mitchell Innovatech Strategic Solutions had secured over $200 million in new contracts, representing growth that neither company could have achieved independently. More importantly, client satisfaction scores were the highest in company history, reflecting the benefits of our integrated approach to consulting and manufacturing. The success of the merger validated my belief that the best business relationships are built on trust, mutual respect, and a shared commitment to excellence. But it also reinforced something more personal, that people are capable of remarkable growth and change when they're given the opportunity and incentive to do so. As I sit in my office today, 5 years after receiving that devastating text message, I'm amazed at the journey that brought me here. I'm co-CEO of a company worth over $50 million. I've been recognized as one of the top business leaders in the industry. And I've built relationships and partnerships that I never could have imagined. But the professional success, while gratifying, isn't what I'm most proud of. What means the most to me is the personal growth, both my own and that of the people around me. I've learned to look beyond surface conflicts to understand underlying motivations. I've developed the confidence to take calculated risks and the wisdom to know when to be forgiving rather than vindictive. Most importantly, I've discovered that success isn't about avoiding failure or eliminating conflict. It's about how you respond when things go wrong, how you treat people when they're vulnerable, and whether you're willing to grow and change when circumstances demand it. The story of my firing from Innovatech has become something of a case study in business schools and leadership development programs. But I always tell people who hear the story that the real lesson isn't about revenge or vindication. The real lesson is about the power of choosing growth over grievance, opportunity over victimhood, and forgiveness over retribution. It's about understanding that our worst moments don't define us. How we respond to those moments does. And sometimes, if we're very lucky and very wise, those worst moments can become the foundation for our greatest achievements,